Welcome. We are here in June. It's June 14th. It's Flag Day. We want to honor the flag today. Neither one of us, though, brought a rainbow flag. I'm getting so forgetful, David.
So am I.
My very special guest, David Knapp from Guilford. And we were just sitting here thinking, what brought us together 30 years ago? Metropolitan Community Church in New Haven. Definitely. That was it. So we're celebrating a 30-year friendship today, which is pretty special.
Yes.
Welcome to Poetry of Immigrants. I'm delighted to have you as a guest because we could go 2 hours. There's a lot over the dam, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we are neighbors, Guilford, Westbrook. We've sailed together on Dave's 28-foot boat. He tells me he does 3 things a day, at least. And he writes it down on his calendar so he can do everything. And I guess that's what connects us, the drive to do things for others, to help in a charitable way. By the way, Poetry of Immigrants has something to celebrate in a way, an associated way. We're having a Saturday annual Refugee Day on the Green in New Haven, which is coming up this Saturday. And I learned about that yesterday when I went in for my first orientation and actually training from IRIS, Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services.
Wonderful organization.
Wonderful organization. Have you ever worked with them?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, the Immigrants, the First Congregational Church of Guilford has been sponsoring immigrant families for 30 or 40 years. And the minister, Kendrick Norris, started that way back in the 70s or 80s, I guess. And so I have been involved in that. As far as housing, I have a 3-family 17 to 63 house with 2 apartments. And I've rented the apartments out at reduced rates to a number of immigrant families, boys from Sudan and other families. And I have an Iraqi refugee family who are Muslims living in my house for the last 4 years. They're there right now.
That's wonderful, Dave.
Three children, a 7th grade boy, a 4th grade boy, and a 1st grade girl.
That's walking the walk.
Right.
Talking the talk, but walking the walk too makes all the difference.
Right. Well, it's been, I think, an enriching experience for me, certainly. And apparently the refugees who have stayed there have been very happy and thankful for having a nice place to live, while they're here at a reduced rate, because housing is very expensive.
Especially Guilford.
Right.
And I know your generosity personally as a friend, and I'm really impressed with that. The reaching out to immigrant families to actually be there for them in this basic way. So I'll be trained in the fall with Iris at a deep level, I think, so that I can actually roll up my sleeves and do some walking on the walk too.
Oh, wonderful.
And here we are with Poetry of Immigrants. That's the thing that impressed me about Westbrook. 30 years ago when I was sitting at the muffin corner, I didn't recognize any immigrants, migrants, refugees through language or custom or dress or costume. And today, it seems like every other person on the streets in Westbrook is culturally different, wearing different clothes, speaking different languages. And the Muffin Corner is a good example of that 30 years later. I don't necessarily notice that in Guilford because I'm not in Guilford very often,
Right.
or Madison, but it struck me. So a year and a half ago, I just woke up one morning and said, wait a minute, we have a world-class TV studio here in Westbrook. I'm a resident. We can use the facilities. Why not do something positive for immigrants? And my field is writing poetry, as you know, composition. And here we are. I'm going to ask you to read some of what you wrote in an essay that goes back now to 1993, the fall of 93. But I want to set the tone for the first half of the show as kind of light. And I have a wonderful poem, since it is Gay Pride Month, from a distinctive poet, Richard Blanco. And he was invited by President Barack Obama to read at his first inauguration. And I missed it at that time, but Blanco's been up to Sunken Garden Poetry Festival in Farmington a couple of times. And I'm following him on the internet. He wrote a poem, light in tone and funny, which I think grandmothers and grandparents of gay children or gay grandchildren, like my grandson Nathan, who says, "Grandpa, I'm bi." And he just walked the Gay Pride Parade in Athens, Ohio. And I was just opening 3 texts from him as we were talking before the show. He's wearing his rainbow pin. Queer theory, according to my grandmother. Never drink soda with a straw. Milkshakes, maybe. Stop eyeing your mother's Avon catalog and the men's underwear in those Sears flyers. I've seen you. Stay out of her Tupperware parties and perfume bottles. Don't let her kiss you. She kisses too much, all too much. Avoid hugging men, but if you must, pat them real hard on the back even, if it's your father. Must you keep that cat? Don't pet him so much. Why don't you like dogs? Never play house, even if you're the husband. Quit hanging with that Henry kid. He's too pale, and I don't care what you call them. Those G.I. Joes of his are dolls. Don't draw rainbows or flowers or sunsets. I've seen you. Don't draw at all. No coloring books either. Put away your crayons, your Play-Doh, your Legos. Where are your Hot Wheels? Your laser gun and handcuffs, the knives I gave you. Never fly a kite or roller skate, but light all the firecrackers you want. Kill all the lizards you can. Cut up worms. Feed them to the cat of yours. Don't sit Indian style with your legs crossed. You're no Indian. Stop click-clacking your sandals. You're no girl. For God's sakes, never pee sitting down. I've seen you. Never take a bubble bath or wash your hair with shampoo. Shampoo is for women. So is conditioner. So is mousse. So is hand lotion. Little aside. I used to grease my face as a kid. A confession. Never file your nails or blow dry your hair. Go to the barber shop with your grandfather. You're not unisex. Stay out of the kitchen. Men don't cook. They eat. Eat anything you want except deviled eggs, blow pops, croissant, bagel maybe, cucumber sandwiches, petit four. Don't watch Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. Don't stare at the $6 million man. I've seen you. Never dance alone in your room. Donna Summer, Barry Manilow, The Captain and Tennille, Bette Midler, and all those musicals. Forbidden. Posters of kittens, Star Wars, or the Eiffel Tower. Forbidden. Those fancy books on architecture and art, I threw them in the trash. You can't wear cologne or puka shells, and I better not catch you in clogs. If I see you in a ponytail, I'll cut it off. What? No, you can't pierce your ear, left or right. I don't care. You will not look like a goddamn queer. I've seen you, even if you are one. Poor grandmother.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. He didn't read that at the inauguration. No. What a great
But it's
poem.
a wonderful poem.
It's
I've
a-
never heard it.
It's a wonderful poem.
Yes. Very descriptive. Well, that's what poetry is supposed to do.
Poetry does that. Poetry is descriptive. I'm glad you said that, because Walt Whitman, of course, who was Light in the Loafers
Right.
in the 19th century, had a lover who was a streetcar conductor for years and years and years. He's such an interesting poet in contrast with Emily Dickinson. So let's get into more of the craft of writing and poetry, but I want to introduce him with this poem I discovered this morning. First, though, a little setup. I lost my place.
You must be getting old.
I must be getting old. I remembered the book. I will find Whitman later, but for the moment, you can be Whitman. I was sitting in Dave Knapp's living room in October of '93. I'd just come back from Europe, and I was actually doing a sabbatical project, traveling through Europe, looking for the iconic places of the literary greats. And I wrote a book out of that, but what was more exciting and thrilling was to work on another book, Stories from the Other Side. And I thought, Dave has got a story. Boy, does he have a story. And I asked him to write one for the first book. And it's called Stories from the Other Side, and we have 6 editions out. And here I go to lose my other places, which will be fun. This is what it looks like in the 4th edition. And could you hold up that one, the face of it? That's the first one, the very first one. And there's kind of like a geography and a map motif on the front. So after Dave and I became friends in '88, 30 years ago, kept in touch, ran into each other. I lived in Guilford when I had an apartment. I had given up apartment, car, and the rest to live on half salary to travel Europe to write a book. That's what professors do. But I was well into my 40s. And all the other backpackers had done it in their 20s. Mm-hmm. But sometimes later is better. So there I was. Dave, can I stay at your place until I go on the second half of my sabbatical to California? Just be a couple of weeks. Oh, yeah, come on, he says. You can have the guest room. Just make yourself at home. That's a friend. And yeah, no place to to call my own. So I stayed in the guest room, and one evening I was sitting in Dave's well-appointed living room with the captain's chairs and the sailboats under glass and the old sea captain motif. It was pretty wonderful just to sit there. Of course, I was homeless at the time. And the next thing we knew, came a rap at the door. And it wasn't the Raven. It wasn't Poe's Raven. Beckoning at the wall, it was
the president or vice president of the Quinnipiac Boy Scout Council from New Haven, and his assistant scout executive and the council commissioner. 3 people from the Boy Scout Council. 3
VIPs.
Right.
And I was sitting there with my shirt off in the living room. Horrors. So, heard a knock again. Dave goes to the door, or did I answer the door?
You answered it.
I answered the door.
Right.
Shirtless, homeless, and a poet on the lam. And that produced a story. I asked Dave to write about that and his feelings that went along with that. And it turned out to be a kind of watershed moment in his life. But let's hear his own words from the man himself. Is that good enough for an intro?
Certainly.
Oh, good.
Certainly. Very good. It's called Stories from the Other Side by Dave Knapp. Kicked Out of the Boy Scouts is the title.
Kicked out of the Boy Scouts.
Right.
And this was to come.
Right. The knock came on the front door of my 1763 house. I was expecting to meet with some of my Boy Scout commissioners to discuss how we might provide programs and services to the 40 Cub Packs, Boy Scout troops, and Explorer posts in our East Shore district of Connecticut. In place of the commissioners were 3 men: the professional assistant scout executive, the vice president of the Quinnipiac Boy Scout Council of New Haven, and the district chairman. Although surprised, I had no foreboding as to what was to come. Planning and brainstorming meetings go on all the time among the council and district officers, of which I was one. Taking their seats on the sofa and chairs in my living room, the assistant scout executive, with whom I had spent 2 weeks at the National Boy Scout Jamboree the past summer, opened the meeting by saying, quote, "We have brought you bad news. You are being expelled from the Boy Scouts of America," unquote. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the man across from me who had just said this. This could not be happening to me, of all people, at the age of 67, with a stellar scouting history going back to 1938, when I first joined the Boy Scouts at age 12. I was in shock and disbelief, and felt as if someone had delivered a knockout punch to my gut. I forced myself to ask, "What am I accused of?" His reply, "Do you really want to know?" With a touch of anger, I said, "Of course I want to know." "We have received written information," he said with a tone of annoyance, "after 4 weeks of investigation, that you are a homosexual." He spoke as though he was spitting dirt out of his mouth. "Your imagery and convictions are not compatible with those of the Boy Scouts of America. Here is the dismissal letter and instructions to follow if you wish to appeal this decision." "I will appeal," I said. Incredulously, I asked, "What have I done or said that is contrary to the imagery and convictions of the BSA?" "I can't answer that," was his reply. "The appeal process requires that I must state why my expulsion is in error. How can I do this if you can't or won't tell me what wrongs or acts I have committed?" Answer, "I don't know. Suddenly, the district chairman, sitting next to me, stood up, as did I, shook my hand vigorously, saying, "I support you," and walked out of the house.
Aha!
Feeling totally frustrated and angry at their refusal to tell me what I had done wrong, I asked, "Am I charged with molesting boys?" "Definitely not." "What about my commissioner meeting next week?" Answer: "You must cease all contact with Scouting immediately," said the vice president of the council as he walked out the front door.
Wow. I scooted out the back door and came back later and found Dave just distraught. And I felt so sorry that this had come to pass, and there was more to come as some of the reasons and the answers developed. Let's fast forward for a minute to the first Connie Chung interview at your house. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
There was the big, fantastic aerial out front of your house in Guilford.
Oh, from Dan Rather.
I thought it was
Connie Chung.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Connie Chung,
Right.
Dan Rather,
Right, okay.
had sent the TV crew
Up from New York. Right.
with all the radar antennae going,
Right,
and it was just a sight. I drove by,
right,
and then of course I saw the interview afterward.
right.
And how did we get from the knock at the door
Right,
to Connie Chung and Dan Rather?
right. Well, that is quite interesting. Let's see. I received from an inside source in the Boy Scout Council, who was supporting me sort of quietly and quietly. The inside source told me that the council had received a letter from North Carolina telling them that I was a homosexual. And I knew that there was only one possible person that could have written such a letter, and that was one of my two stepdaughters, whom I acquired when I got married. And they were then aged 11 and 13. Were very good kids, wonderful kids, and I gave them a warm, loving home and paid for their college and everything, and also had a daughter of my own.
Yeah, you did have a daughter.
Right, right. And so anyway, and I could not believe that she had cut me off at the time of the divorce when I came out to my wife and told her that I was gay. And we stayed friends, my wife and I, and she remarried for the third time 3 years later, and that was a very successful marriage, and I was very happy for her. And so anyway, I called the stepdaughter on the phone. She admitted that she wrote the letter. She gave me no rational reason as to why. And we had a very angry, painful conversation. And that's the last that I've heard of her, from her since then. But I could not believe that she had so much anger and hatred, towards me. I still can't believe it. So anyway, that's how the council found out that I was gay, because I didn't go around announcing it, of course.
You didn't come out to your 50s.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then someone spilled the beans to the New Haven Register. And I received a phone call from Josh Kovner, who was the reporter then. He said, "I'm writing a front page article on Sunday morning going to 120,000 subscribers." And he sort of intimated that he was going to write the article regardless you know, whether I wished it or not. And so
wow, he's going to out you to 120,000
almost
people.
like an offer from The Godfather.
Yes.
So,
boy.
So I said, oh, and that's the last thing I wanted. So I said, okay, I will talk with you on the condition that you not use my name.
I remember that. Yeah.
And he honored that, and I figured, and he wrote a very good, fair, and accurate article.
Yeah.
And I trusted him more than I did the Boy Scout Council at that time to do that. And there was a New Haven alderman in New Haven who was supporting me, whom I didn't even know. But anyway, he called me every 2 hours on Sunday morning when the paper came out. I bought 10 copies of the paper, by the way. I was scared to death also.
Wow.
But anyway, he called me and he said, Dan Mather has called and he wants to send a truck up to, a van up to interview you for the 6 o'clock news with Connie Chung. The New York Times wants to interview you, the Bridgeport Post, the Hartford Courant, et cetera, et cetera.
It hit the fan.
And so that's the last thing that I wanted, but I didn't have a choice about it. So he did write the article. It was very fair and accurate. And instead of using my name, I used the name of my grandson, whom I adore, is now an adult, married with kids. I used the name Scott. So the name appeared with Scott in the paper. I
remember that, yeah.
And also he did an interview with the minister, Ken Norris. And the minister was quoted as saying, how could they do this to him, to Dave? He's a wonderful church member. He's devoted his life, 10 years of his life, to scouting professionally, and loves the Boy Scouts, and this is outrageous, you know, what they're doing.
And subsequently, you got the UCC to go through an evolutionary process to become open and affirming.
Yes, there's a process that the Protestant churches have. It's called different names. It's more light, I think, in Lutheran and reconciling in the Methodist Church, but in the UCC Congregational Church, it's called open and affirming. And what they do is go through a 2-year process of study, mostly monthly workshops, studying it from a psychological, sociological, theological, medical aspect, with, you know, professional, outstanding speakers coming, and then after 2 years of study and debate and discussion and sending out information to all the 1,000 members of the church, they vote on whether or not they wish to formally become open and affirming, in which case they're announcing it to the public in various ways, as well as all the church members, that they are welcoming GLBT people. And I was very proud that our church did it, and when I first came out in the church, I was the only out person out of 1,000 members. The only out there. I mean, they were there, and people had all sorts of suspicions of he or she might be this or that, but
the old days.
Now, it's completely different.
What a world!
Yeah, we ended up having a lesbian minister recently, openly lesbian minister of the church.
Do you remember anything at all about the Connie Chung interview? In other words, were you identified by face?
Well, they one of the things they did that I really required was that they either didn't show my face, or they masked it over somehow. And by the way, they actually never ran the interview.
Wow.
Which very few people know, that there were some other emergency things that came up. So they never ran it, which was fine with me.
Oh, yeah.
Fine with me.
At that stage.
But
I wondered because they were going to
right, because if they had the
mask
face,
your
then,
face, and you would still be Scott.
Yeah, but they were going to do that, right.
Yeah.
And then I came out to the church a couple services, a couple of Sundays later. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, that was pretty dramatic. when I did that. Because during the sharing hour in the church, one of the choir members, whom I didn't know, got up and said, "I would like to ask the congregation to pray for our member by the name of Scott." and nobody knew who. Well, purposely they didn't know who Scott was.
Who is Scott?
And for some reason, usually I was ushering, but for that morning I had to do an interview with some station in San Francisco, open interview. So I got to church on the second service at 11, and I was just sitting there. And then when he said that, for some weird reason, I decided that I asked for the microphone, because you have to use that when you're sharing so people can hear you. And I asked for the microphone, and I got up and I said, "I am the anonymous Scott." And you could heir shocks and sounds all over the congregation, because nobody knew. Yes. Nobody knew or suspected that I was gay. And then I said, I want to thank the two ministers there, one female and Ken Norris, and this church. And I said, this is the most painful thing I've ever been through in my life, and traumatic thing. And then I started crying.
In church?
Standing up in front of the whole church, the whole congregation. And then I just sat down, and at the end of the service, I thought, what a stupid, dumb thing to do. But anyway, at the end of the service, all sorts of people came up to me and said, I have a brother, I have a son, I have a daughter, I have a uncle, I have a relative.
Everybody has a gay
And I thought, well, maybe doing this dumb thing will have and does have some positive effect. And it did.
And it certainly did. Oh, this is a perfect moment for an interlude, a 3-minute break. But I just want to repeat your words. Holding the mic, standing in front of a crowd. I am the anonymous Scott. And the courage that took?
Well, I don't know whether it's courage or just dumb inspiration or something.
Oh, inspiration for sure. Thanks. We'll be back after 3 minutes. The service announcements are marvelous, so please note, and maybe get up, have a beer, put your feet up, and come back so that we can blow your socks off with some good lyrics. Wow, that was great. Thanks.
Please have a seat. I'll be honest. Your resume, not what I'm used to.
I know.
Okay, so what would you bring to my company?
What do you need?
I need a hard worker.
Good. I've got 2 part-time jobs and to help my parents pay the bills.
I need problem-solving skills.
I got through high school without a car, a phone, or a computer.
No college degree, though.
Not yet, but life's taught me a lot, and I'm ready for more.
Well, you're not the typical kind of candidate that I hire. But you are exactly what I'm looking for.
Your company could be missing out on the candidates it needs most. Learn how to find, cultivate, and train a great pool of untapped talent at gradsoflife.org.
Wake the sun, tell him that I've begun to dream of things to come, and tell the trees not to look for me. I'm going to find some peace of mind. Wake the sun, wake the sun, wake the sun, wake the sun.
Every day, the people in our community rally in support of United Way as we strive together to make a big impact to change lives in Middlesex County. From our main streets to our institutions, from our neighborhoods to our town halls and our classrooms, we're working with our partners to create a stronger community. It's an inspiring effort, and we invite you to join us. Volunteer, donate, live united.
These are the dishes that Sandra gave to Goodwill, where Pete found the job that gave him a sense of purpose. This is the dress and the shirt that Madeline gave to Goodwill, where Graciela learned the English that changed her life. This is the dress, the dishes, and the shirt that David and Jackie found at Goodwill. Goodwill, what goes around comes around.
Welcome back. We're glad to have you back. I'm here with Dave Knapp, my dear, dear friend from Guilford, celebrating 30 years of friendship with me and me with him. And we've heard a lot of his private story. And now, as befits most of us in professional life, we kind of graduate to public life, to being out there as professionals doing whatever it is we do, teach, sell books, doctors, lawyers. So before we move into a public phase and an archival history phase, which is really something worth preserving, almost like the oral history project is exciting. I'd like to, in an attempt at being seamless, just bring out the rest of that initial moment of shock. And I'm going to read Dave's words, which are very meaningful to me. So we left it with the president of the council walked out the front door. And Dave's words are, I slumped back into the upholstered living room chair, still in shock, deeply hurt, and angry. Since joining the Boy Scouts in 1938 at the age of 12, I had loved scouting, participating in it with enthusiasm and passion. Eagle Scout, Vigil Order of the Arrow, Camp Waterfront Director, junior leader in the troop, all through high school, 10 years as a professional district scout executive in 2 councils with an outstanding record. My only reason for leaving was getting married at age 32, and so on. So what a great history in scouting you have, and all that's contribution to sort of the public side of life. I want to get back into family relationships and how that is a big part of our emotional life, but also our coming out stories. I have a letter that I wrote to my daughter. In fact, I've written 12 letters at Christmas when suddenly out of the blue 3 years ago in a very, very, very low moment, and it's her birthday today, she's 47, she said, I don't think you should have had kids. Mm-hmm. Whoa. And I know as a dad I've had some lapses and ups and downs, especially in my own coming out story. But I wrote her 12 letters at Christmas 3 years ago, and she accepted them and loved them, and now we're about as close as you can get, especially since she's in need now. Her significant other is probably terminally ill with kidney disease, has had a kidney transplant, but it's not working. So that's what dads are for, and parents generally. Part of a letter number 5 that I wrote is about writing, which probably applies to maybe some of the feelings you had, Dave, when you wrote this story.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. This process mitigates the pain of loss. As my arm muscles move to strike the computer keys, last night's BBC broadcast of World News covered the 1-year anniversary, November 13th, a Friday, of the Paris nightclub massacre. In a 1-to-1 interview, a father who lost his precious daughter that night with over 100 killed and over 400 wounded explained that he wrote his pain into a book, just published, and continues to write every day to help assuage his suffering, his still raw feelings of loss and consternation, and his overwhelming sense of helplessness as a father. I can't imagine what that would feel like. But then there's the Pulse nightclub in Florida, and on and on and on. And it's the parents and the grandparents who are still there, who feel the pain. But somehow, through writing, which is my field, I encourage people to maybe come to terms step by step. Here's back to Richard Blanco, living with a lover in Maine. He says, "What's this Cuban doing in Maine with this lumberjack?" I miss the Gulf Coast. That's the point. Looking for the Gulf Motel is the title of his book. It's in the Guilford Library, as well as Searching for the Beach of the Dead. On the theme of father again. My father, my hands. My father gave me these hands, fingers inch wide and muscular like his, the same folds of skin like squinted eyes looking back at me whenever I wash my hands in the kitchen sink and remember him washing garden dirt off his or helping my mother dry the dishes every night. These are his fingernails, square, flat. 10 small mirrors I look into and see him signing my report card or mixing batter for our pancakes on Sunday mornings. His same whirls of hair near my wrists, magnetic lines that pull me back to him, tying my shoelaces, pointing at words as I learn to read, and years later, greasy hands teaching me to change the oil in my car, immaculate hands showing me how to tie my necktie. These are his knuckles, rising, falling like hills between my veins, his pulse at my wrist under the watch he left for me ticking since his death. Alive when I hold another man's hand and remember mine around his thumb through the carnival at Tamiami Park. How he lifted me up on his shoulders, his hands wrapped around my ankles, keeping me steady above the world. Still. How true. We still sit on our father's shoulders, don't we? And sometimes, in some cases, our grandfather's shoulders, holding the thumbs. What a wonderful poet Richard Blanco is. Born actually in Spain to Cuban parents, but then they moved to Miami and then New York and then back to Miami. So he's kind of had a checkered American career, but he's an immigrant poet from Cuba who has really, really, really made good. I'm so happy for him. And he certainly fills our ranks as LGBT poets.
Beautiful.
Beautiful poem. There's another fellow. I found this in Tucson when I was just meandering up 4th Avenue during the book festival. And Since today is also a Flag Day theme, I want to read this fellow's poem. He's born in Puerto Rico, emigrated to the States, and came out as a poet. And it's about flags. And this is a strange take. I think I better put the mic in the holder before I fall on the poetry book. The flag, that flag. It's a great cover, don't you think? Narcissus.
Very unusual.
Very unusual. Home movies of Narcissus. And we all know who Narcissus was. Fell in love with his own image in the water and drowned.
Oh, I didn't know he drowned.
Drowned. That flag. The Motel 6 clerk thinks I'm Italian and complains to me about Puerto Ricans. And I nod because she has the key to the last cheap room in town. I unpack and go for a ride down Joe Perez Road and watch two white shirtless men do drug deals. One looks at me, laughs. What does he see? This sexy thug has a Confederate flag in his truck window. He rubs himself again and again, and I watch the way one is possessed by a wreck. The deal done, the two men then slap each other on the ass and ride dust storms back to town. I sit there thinking that the f***ers are right, that they are big, handsome, that they are America's perfect heirs, and that I'm not. Aging Puerto Rican homosexual poet, exiled to a borrowed bed. I walk past the clerk and sing, Buenas noches, but it isn't one, for I dream of that flag, of a terrible army of soldiers in uniforms of skin sent to steal from me the head of Joe Perez. But I've hidden it inside my own skull. It is safe. Oppression. We know what that feels like in the LGBTQ community. We have about 10 minutes left. And as I say, we probably go on 8 hours.
Yes, we probably could.
We probably could. But I want to open it up to any errant thoughts, any feelings that have bubbled up today, any stories that have come to the surface. But I want to encourage you by saying, I enjoyed working with you creating the story, because when you first wrote it, it started at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And most stories' narrative do go beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
And they work chronologically and sequentially, usually best by a linear sequence. But I said, that knock is so much of a writer's hook, as we call it in the trade, that is the moment to start. And you changed everything around and did it that way. I was so happy you did. And then, of course, we're talking about 4 or 5 pages of your story. I think your voice would be better on reflections. Do you mind?
No, I can, although I have some additional reflections.
Oh, good. Let's go there first.
That supersede that, really.
You bet.
And as you know, I'm still speaking to high schools with Stonewall speakers, even though I'm not running it anymore. But interestingly enough, because of largely due to a lot of the work that Stonewall Speakers has done, the requests for speaking at high schools has gone way, way down. We have very few speakers. 25, we just had, about 4 or 5 years ago, we had our 25th anniversary, okay? And in the 25 years, we've spoken to almost 100,000 students.
Wow.
High school mostly, some prep schools and churches. We've gone to almost every one of approximately 150 high schools in the state since 1987. Since 1987 when Richard Ryle was murdered.
Right, so we're talking 30 years.
30 years.
How wonderful.
And 25 years ago, we had one gay straight alliance, one in the whole state, in Staples High School in Westport with Dan Wogue, wonderful guy, English teacher and soccer teacher, who came out. Talk about guts at that time. He's lucky he didn't get fired.
Yeah.
And now almost every single high school has a gay straight alliance. Almost every single high school in the state, even in the more conservative rural areas like northeastern Connecticut, which is very different from Fairfield County.
It's almost the entire state.
And also there 25 years ago, 30 years ago, there were very few students that were out. Okay, very
few.
In fact, I know a number of high schools where a student, often senior boys who were very active, like football captain or student council president, who committed suicide.
Oh yeah, suicide is.
And one of our speaking engagements was canceled because of this. They always said publicly, well, he was on drugs, he was on alcohol, he broke up with his girlfriend.
No.
But some of the special ed teachers and others, because I sold textbooks, so I visited high schools every day. That was my job for 23 years.
McGraw-Hill.
So McGraw-Hill, Macmillan, Glencoe Division, one of the top publishers at that time of high school text. But anyway, some of the special ed teachers told me that that was not the real reason that the person, mostly boys, committed suicide, that he was secretly gay. He was the only son in a conservative family, a conservative religion, whether it be Catholic or fundamentalist or something, and that he felt that if anybody found out that he was a homo, that was the end of his life. So anyway, now almost every single high school has out gay GLBT students. I found an old list in some of my old files where I had a list of 10 high school teachers in the whole state of Connecticut that I knew were gay. And I met them at the Hartford Gay Pride Center, where that was the only place where you could go, and that and MCC Church.
Yeah, MCC.
Were the only places where you could go and not get caught, and gay bars.
Yeah.
That's why there was such a high degree of alcoholism in the gay community. That was the only place they could go secretly and not be identified. And anyway, and when I did meet these gay teachers, which is very rare, the Hartford Pride Center, they'd always say, don't tell anybody, which of course I would not. But 10 teachers. Now, almost every high school has out gay GLBT teachers, as well as students, and it's a non-issue to the point where, at least in Guilford High School, Hand High School, and most others, they don't even talk about it.
No, Connecticut has just leaped over the whole mountain.
But in a period of 30 years, that is incredible.
It is incredible.
Incredible.
And the last 10 years, I would say, have been the most incredible.
Yes.
We are just about to wrap it up.
Okay.
And that is the quickest hour I think I've ever experienced.
Can I tell an epiphany, or is that not enough time?
We got 30 seconds?
No, okay. My epiphanies, the 4 most painful things in my life that I thought were terrible and traumatic turned out to be the best. Finding I was gay, getting divorced, getting kicked out of the Boy Scouts. I wouldn't be fighting them.
Right.
I'd still be in. And then the other thing was, what was the other thing? There was the fourth thing. I can't remember the fourth thing. Anyway, it turned out to be the best things in my life.
Complete.
And most of what I've accomplished has been since I retired.
What a wonderful wrap. Thank you, David. Oh, you'll have to come back as another guest. I'm so grateful you came.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
I should have gotten that in there earlier.
Oh, that's okay. I want to read just one sentence. God has given me so many blessings filled to overflowing. I really believe he works in strange, mysterious, and wonderful ways.
Oh yes, that was another one.
You said it best.
Oh, I remember the fourth thing was getting kicked out of the Methodist Church, which most people don't know. 27 years I was lay leader and Sunday school teacher and so forth. But if I hadn't been kicked out of the Methodist Church, I never would have joined the First Congregational Church in Guilford. And there's a big, big difference.
God works in mysterious, wonderful ways. And here we are, 30 years later. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's a wrap. Thanks so much. That was great.